The United Kingdom spent £6.2 billion building 2 aircraft carriers, and that number is worth sitting with for a moment. £6.2 billion. 2 ships. And here is the situation those ships currently find themselves in. As of 2025, the Royal Navy has taken delivery of just 38 F-35B jets against an original government commitment of 138, which means the most expensive warships ever constructed in British history are regularly at sea, carrying roughly a quarter of the aircraft they were designed to operate. On paper, HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales are among the most capable power projection platforms afloat. In practice, they are occasionally very large, very costly, and very empty flight decks. But the aircraft loadout is, at its core, a political and budgetary failure. Uncomfortable, yes, but theoretically fixable by writing the right checks to the right people. The engineering story sitting underneath all of that is far more interesting because it cannot be fixed by writing anything at all. It was locked into these ships before a single weld was laid, and the question of whether these carriers can actually survive long enough to matter in a real conflict comes down to a collection of design decisions so specific, so counterintuitive, and so rarely discussed in public that most people who follow these ships closely have never encountered them. So let us talk about what it genuinely takes to build a warship that will not go down. Not unsinkable in the sense that a 1912 press release might use the word. Unsinkable in the sense that after absorbing serious damage, the ship carries on moving, carries on operating, and keeps its crew alive long enough to matter. The problem begins with what modern anti-ship weapons are actually capable of doing to a large surface vessel. A warship of carrier size is one of the most complex engineering structures humanity routinely produces, containing tens of thousands of interconnected systems covering power generation, propulsion, damage control, aviation fuel handling, ammunition storage, communications, and command functions. Every single one of those systems doubles as a potential path to catastrophic failure. A successful strike on the wrong compartment does not merely damage that compartment. It cascades outward through the ship's body like a current through water. Power fails across connected systems. Fires spread through ventilation routes designed for air circulation, not flame containment. Flooding overwhelms pumps built to manage routine seawater ingress rather than a hull breach the size of a large vehicle. And on a conventionally designed warship, if the engine room is destroyed, the ship stops moving. If the bridge is destroyed, command collapses entirely. If the hangar is destroyed, the aircraft are gone with it. One strike, one cascade, one carrier removed from the conflict. This is not a theoretical concern. The lessons exist in the historical record, written in real steel and real salt water. During the 1982 South Atlantic conflict, HMS Sheffield was struck by a single Exocet missile whose warhead failed to fully detonate. The ship was lost anyway, because unburned rocket propellant from the weapon ignited fires that the damage control teams could not bring under control. Sheffield did not sink from the kinetic force of the impact. It was destroyed by the systemic collapse that followed a single point of failure the designers had not fully anticipated. The Royal Navy absorbed that lesson and did not forget it. And that is when the design philosophy behind the Queen Elizabeth class starts to make a different kind of sense. Forget what gets said publicly about survivability at commissioning ceremonies. What the contractors were quietly working through during the design phase was a more honest question. Not whether the ship survives the hit, but whether it survives the 60 minutes after it. That specific problem is what brought QinetiQ into the program in July 2002. QinetiQ, the defense technology company that emerged from the old Defense Evaluation and Research Agency, had accumulated more than 50 years of full-scale weapons effects data gathered by watching ships burn, flood, and structurally fail under controlled conditions that would unsettle most engineers. From that data, they constructed a software modeling system called Survive, capable of running a warship design through scenarios ranging from a rocket-propelled grenade strike to multiple torpedo impacts in sequence. The early CVF hull concepts went through all of it, and what came back shaped the ships that now sit in Portsmouth Harbor. The results of that process are strange looking if you do not know what drove them. Take the twin island configuration. Most aircraft carriers operate with a single island superstructure on the starboard side of the flight deck, housing the bridge and the flying control position in one structure. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales each carry 2 islands, separated by roughly a third of the flight deck's total length. When the design was first discussed publicly, the explanation offered centered on the practical benefit of separating the exhaust uptakes from the gas turbines and the diesel generators, which is accurate as far as it goes. The fuller explanation is about redundancy of command. Each island contains a complete, independently operational conning position and aircraft control facility. Should one island be struck and rendered unusable, the other continues to function without interruption. The ship retains command. It retains the ability to launch and recover aircraft. It keeps fighting. That capability is almost unique among the world's operational carrier fleets, and it did not emerge from a preference for unusual aesthetics. It emerged directly from the question QinetiQ was asked to answer. Alongside the twin islands sits what the program calls the 3-citadel architecture, which is where the survivability logic becomes genuinely striking. Each carrier divides internally into 3 independent operational zones, and each citadel carries its own power generation, its own fire main network, its own ventilation system, and its own damage control capability. These are not simply watertight compartments of the kind found on any large vessel. They function as operationally separate ships that happen to share a hull, which means the destruction of one citadel leaves 2 others intact and running. The ship does not go dark. It does not lose propulsion. It continues to operate at reduced capacity, which in a conflict scenario is the difference between a mission-capable asset and wreckage. Underpinning all of this is a propulsion arrangement that still surprises people who encounter it for the first time. The Queen Elizabeth class uses integrated electric propulsion, combining 2 Rolls-Royce Marine Trent MT-30 gas turbines, the same engine family at the core of the Boeing 787's power plant, with 4 Wärtsilä diesel generators feeding power to 4 GE electric propulsion motors that drive twin propellers. The word that matters in that sentence is integrated, because electric propulsion severs the physical connection that conventional warship design maintains between the engines and the screws. The prime movers can be distributed throughout the ship, housed behind armor, protected within separate citadels, insulated from one another by hundreds of meters of hull. Lose one generator set and the remaining units compensate. The ship slows, but it does not stop. For a platform whose survival depends on remaining mobile and unpredictable, that distinction carries real weight. The hangar sits surrounded by 2 full compartment depths on all sides, separated from the flight deck above by a complete gallery deck running the full height of the structure. Fireproof shutters divided into 3 independently controlled sections, each capable of being drenched in foam or water without affecting the others. Across the whole ship, there are more than 3,000 individual compartments and more than 360,000 meters of internal pipework. None of that makes for compelling photography. None of it looks impressive at a commissioning ceremony. What it does is give the ship a fighting chance of remaining operational after the kind of damage that would have destroyed an earlier generation of carrier design outright. The intellectual history behind this approach runs deeper than the CVF program itself. During the 1930s, while the United States and Japan were optimizing their carrier designs around maximum aircraft capacity using open hangars and wooden flight decks, the Royal Navy looked at the closed geography of the Mediterranean, assessed the threat environment honestly, and reached a different conclusion. British carriers would carry armored flight decks and protected enclosed hangars. The cost was a reduced aircraft capacity. The return on that investment arrived in the Pacific when a kamikaze strike on a Royal Navy carrier prompted a brief inspection and the recorded observation that it was, quote, a bit of a nuisance. An American officer watching the same scenario unfold on a U.S. carrier noted that on his ship, it would have been a catastrophe. That institutional memory never fully left the organization. It shaped the CVF program at a level below the budget arguments and the procurement disputes, embedded in the hull form itself. Now here is where the story takes a turn that the survivability engineers cannot really be blamed for, but which the program's supporters find genuinely difficult to explain away. A ship designed to absorb torpedo strikes and missile impacts has been rendered operationally unavailable twice in recent years by a propeller shaft coupling. In August 2022, an external shaft coupling on HMS Prince of Wales failed during workup exercises, and the vessel needed to be towed back to port. The repair program ran for 9 months. In February 2024, a shaft issue on HMS Queen Elizabeth left her unable to participate in NATO exercise Steadfast Defender, two of the most sophisticated pieces of survivability engineering afloat, sidelined by components that cost less than a mid-range family saloon. The writers of naval fiction would have the good sense to leave that detail out. But this is the 10% reality of what the program has actually delivered, and it matters because the survivability architecture is genuine. The 3 Citadel design works as specified. The twin command islands work as specified. The distributed electric propulsion, the hardened hangar, the 30-plus years of institutional doctrine about what happens when a warship takes a hit, all of it functions. And precisely none of it is relevant if the ship cannot sail. The gap between the design philosophy and the operational reality is where most of the program's credibility has been quietly worn away. The survivability engineering makes an assumption, and that assumption is that the ship is at sea, crewed, and carrying aircraft. As of 2025, the National Audit Office has identified serious capability gaps across the F-35B fleet, covering shortages of spare parts, trained engineers, and qualified aircrew. The original government commitment was 138 F-35B aircraft across the program's life. The contracted total currently sits at 48, with 38 delivered and no approved timetable for procuring the remainder. The Ministry of Defense has at various points examined the option of placing one carrier in extended readiness, which translates in plain language to parking it and waiting for a budget cycle that may or may not arrive in time. The engineering answered the question it was given with genuine competence. The question it was never asked is what happens when the political will to fund the rest of it runs short. Small movements in the right direction are visible. In November 2024, both carriers operated at sea simultaneously for the first time in a considerable period, which sounds like a modest achievement until you consider how rarely it had happened before. In April 2025, the Crow's Nest Airborne Early Warning System reached full operating capability, closing a gap that had left the carrier group without organic radar cover for longer than anyone in the program cared to admit publicly. The F-35B procurement question is unresolved and active. When the numbers and the schedule become clearer, that story will be covered here, because the gap between what the carrier requires and what the budget currently provides is exactly the kind of analysis this channel tracks. Staying subscribed is the most direct way to catch it when it lands. What the Queen Elizabeth class was designed to answer was never the simple question of whether such a ship could be destroyed. The engineers were asked something harder and more specific. How many times can this ship be struck before it has to stop fighting? They produced an answer that draws on lessons from the South Atlantic conflict, from Pacific warfare doctrine, from 50 years of weapons effects data, and from a design philosophy that the Royal Navy has carried forward since the 1930s. It is, by any honest assessment, a good answer to a hard question. The strategists, the procurement officials, and whoever is responsible for the shaft couplings are still working through their parts of the problem.